our fifth and last day of the conference. Thank you to everyone who has joined us up to this point. So today is focused on our virtual field trips and our workshops. So this morning from 9:05 to 11:15, we have a series of 3 different videos. Our RiversEdge West staff went out and visited some various landowners or land managers across the Grand Valley to discuss some wildfire mitigation and restoration. So we'll be doing that this morning. We'll have a break from 11:15 to 12:15, and then we'll have a workshop from 12:15 to 1:45, a climate smart approach to riparian restoration and revegetation, followed by a 15-minute break. And then this afternoon, you'll have a option to pick between 2 different workshops, mycorrhizal fungi and restoration in the Western US, and a monitoring workshop. For those who joined us yesterday, I did say there were 3 different links for today, which was not correct. So there's actually 1 link. So this link that you're on right now will be your link for the whole day. So, and just a reminder, everything is recorded. So I know this is this afternoon, you do have to pick between the 2 workshops, but you'll be able to go back and review both of them. So real quick before we get started, wanted to thank our sponsors one last time. We couldn't do this presentation and this conference without them. So thank you for that. And quick housekeeping. We're all familiar with Zoom, but please make sure you keep yourselves on mute as the presentations are happening. You're welcome to keep your video on if you'd like. Since we do have a breakout room session happening this afternoon, if you don't have the latest version of Zoom, you're going to want to make sure to upload that. So the Zoom client for meetings is the one you're going to want to download. Okay, with that, I think we'll get started. So our first video is with Melissa Workmaster, Kyle Allstat, and Corey Lindberg with the Bureau of Reclamation. This video is taken near Cameo, Colorado, and the title is Post-Cameo Fire Revegetation Restoration and Lessons Learned.
Hi, I'm Melissa Workmaster. I work for the Western Colorado Area Office of the Bureau of Reclamation here in Grand Junction, Colorado. I'm the Lands and Recreation Group Chief, Supervisor over wildlife areas, recreation, and realty. And we're looking at an area that burned in 2018, Memorial Day weekend, so we're thinking the end of May. And it was caused by a vehicle over in the interstate. It was pulling a trailer and the tire caught on fire. And at the time, the winds were extremely strong through this area. It's created a challenge for us being able to come out here and spray at times because it may be pretty calm conditions in town. But if anything's over 10 miles an hour winds, we don't spray. After that happened, that fire, it actually spread through reclamation property. Also, Halliburton Company has property in here, as well as the state park, James M. Robb, Colorado State Park, Island Acres. This area isn't an area that's open to the public, but we manage it for vegetation, for wildlife out here. That fire burned up a bunch of riparian areas, which included cottonwood galleries. At the time, there was a nest that had bald eagles and eaglets in it that probably didn't survive that fire. I'd say the trees in here, they're not super old, mature cottonwood trees, but they were mid-aged, provided a nice cottonwood area for wildlife to nest and use for habitat in here. And it also burned up, we have some sumac in here, a little bit of Russian olive, some tamarisk, which we weren't too concerned about it burning up, more concerned about it coming back. And rabbit brush and some of the native grasses like saltgrass and saccatone. And then we do have understory noxious weeds such as Russian knapweed, white top, there's some various thistles, and a little bit of perennial pepperweed. So we were concerned about those getting a hold in here. and taking off and spreading and increasing and even crowding out the native species that we do have, the desirable species. So Cammie Long with Colorado State Forest Service, she put together maps of this area as well as a previous fire that we'd had over on Horse Thief Canyon State Wildlife Area. And she contacted everybody that had been involved, from Colorado State Parks, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife at Horse Thief, BOR and Halliburton, and brought us all together to talk about what was the next step. What were we going to do to rehab this area? And so one of the first things we did is we walked around the areas and checked out what had burned, what was still there, and put together ideas of what we needed to do to rehab this area. We knew we had to keep the Russian knapweed and the tamarisk from coming back, so we would have to do control on those, as well as the Russian knapweed and the white top. And then we evaluated what seasons we'd need to treat. I think we put together just a real rough weed inventory of how many acres we thought we needed to control the weeds, what our plan was for controlling the weeds, integrated pest management. There were some options, but our main option was to use herbicide to control the weeds here. We felt that would be the quickest and most beneficial and probably the safest on the environment for what we were doing. And then after we walked the property, we put together rough plans with, it was Tamarisk Coalition then, now it's RiversEdge West, with Shannon Hatch, and estimates on what we thought it would take to control the weeds, as well as what it would take to rehab the area by replanting it later. And then beyond that, we have future plans to maybe put in some piezometers to see where the water table is now, where it would benefit to actually re-establish trees in the area for the cottonwoods that we've lost, and maybe some other species too, to increase the diversity and potential for survival out here. So one of the first things after that we did receive a grant through RiversEdge West, or Tamarisk Coalition, through the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and for all of these properties. And we talked about with RiversEdge West coming up with a strike team, some seasonals through Western Colorado Conservation Corps that were able to also control these areas, Kyle and Lewis. And they were able to come out in the fall and winter and help with the tamarisk, cutting some of the tamarisk and spraying some of the tamarisk to help us with the control. And then we knew we had to get a hold of the Russian knapweed. And so late in the year, we had already tried going out to this area and using our side-by-side to drive around, and we found that there were a lot of pokey sticks left from the tamarisk that had burned, and a lot of it's hard to see. It's under the taller Russian knapweed that came back, and so we got a lot of flat tires. So we decided that we would need maybe a track vehicle to use out here, and we rented a track vehicle, and we planned on spraying Milestone at 5 to 7 ounces per acre in the fall, and trying to use the track vehicle with a tank to spray that. And one of our challenges was it was late in the year, which was still okay for spraying Russian knapweed, but we had our tank freeze. And so Corey from our staff, Corey Lidberg, and Teresa Neese from Mesa County Weed and Pest, they came out and they did do some backpack work out here on Russian knapweed and kind of did a little bit of control on the weeds, but it was getting late in the year, and without having equipment that we could use, and with the freeze and all, we decided we'd come back in the spring and control the white top. And in the spring, we came out and we had Halliburton was very helpful. They helped us get access to this property. Brian Paget was working for them then, and at that time, we could come out. They were willing to let us use water, which was a challenge because we have to go a long ways to get water for our tanks to spray. And so we tried spraying in the spring with their Toolcat that they loaned us, which was kind of a heavy-duty side-by-side kind of vehicle with a tank in the back. and that ended up getting flat tires. They thought the tires were pretty tough on it, but by the time they got the tires fixed, we were able to spray out several backpack loads of the, we were using Telar at 1 ounce per acre on the white top or hoary cress. The reason we selected that herbicide is because it does not impact shrubs and trees, and we did have some regrowth, plants coming back, the sumacs and some cottonwoods at the bases, and we didn't want to impact those at that time. We were hopeful that we would get more regrowth and more success. So that was our noxious weed control in spring 2019. We came out again. Actually, we wanted to come out again. No, we did. Sorry. Fall 2019, we came out, and Corey Lidberg and Griff Shireman from our staff came out, and we used the Toolcat last fall to spray the Russian knapweed. Halliburton would provide us a driver even for that in places, and they were able to really knock back the Russian knapweed again by using not Telar, Milestone at 5 to 7 ounces in the fall. And then we wanted to come out again in the spring and spray white top again. And what happened is, in that time period, Halliburton had sold the property, or was in the process of selling the property, and we couldn't get a hold of the new owners to get access. And we don't have access through a road; it's only through their property. It's a little challenging because there's railroad tracks that we are limited in where we can cross to one location. That's about quarter mile, half mile from the site where we need to get to. And there's also water between the railroad tracks and our property, where sometimes we can get through and cross, on our own, just walking in with backpacks. So we had the challenge of access. And then late last summer of 2020, we were able to get access to the property again, and reach out to the new owners, and I think it's V&S, and they were very supportive of allowing us to come in and do what we needed to do, just keep in communication and let them know ahead when we were coming out. And so we came out this fall, Corey Lidberg and Kyle Alstott from Bureau Reclamation, and I came out for part of a day, and we sprayed the Russian knapweed again with Milestone, and we could already see a big difference in what the property was looking like. Unfortunately, some of the earlier cottonwood sprouts at the bases of the cottonwoods, we didn't notice as many, so those must have died or dried up. It's been a couple years of drought here, and that's really impacted the survival of the native species, their ability to come back. And we did notice that there was a good kill on the Russian knapweed from the year before. And it's hard to tell with Russian knapweed. From fall to spring, you may be able to see the dieback, but you can't see it right after you spray it, because we usually spray it late in the fall. So you have to wait till the next year to see if it was successful. The same thing on white top. You can see it takes a long time even to see it dying. So it just the plant kind of fades to a tan color, and it's hard to tell, well, is this naturally the plant's getting older and dying and the chemical didn't hurt it, or did we kill it and the chemical, the Telar, just takes a long time. And it does take a long time to see evidence of mortality from Telar. And for us, it would be a whole season before we see whether it was successful or not, a whole year. So it would take us, from April or May when we spray till the next April or May to see what the kill was on the white top. So we got out again and sprayed Russian knapweed this fall, and then our plans are in the spring to come out and treat the white top one more time. We're looking at treating Russian knapweed one more time. We need to watch for Russian knapweed can produce allelopathic chemicals in the soil that prevent other plants from growing. So we're looking at our labels for Milestone and Telar to be sure that we're able to plant. And the best time of year to plant out here is in the fall, late fall, for when we get our moisture. We don't want to plant, if we can help it, in the spring and then it gets through the drier periods, the seed would just come up, sprout, and burn up if we don't get any moisture. So we're reevaluating what we want to do, and we would plant a native grass mix out here based on the soil conservation soil surveys, what's recommended on the soils that we have here. And we're going to broadcast it because we're not able to pull implements behind our tractor through this area, again, because of the Russian knapweed sticks. It would just tear up our equipment that we use. And because we're going to have to broadcast the seed, it means that we'll have to apply it at much higher rates, about double the normal rate that we would apply it for higher success for the seed to survive. And the reason we're going with the grass mix is because we know that we're going to need to follow up on the broadleaf noxious weed control on the Russian knapweed, some thistles, perennial pepperweed, and white top. So we don't want to spray out what we're seeding for the broadleaf native species. And then in the future, we talked about putting in piezometers to measure the water depth. And once we get a handle on that, we're hoping we can plant some cottonwoods and other species. One thing that Corey and Kyle came up with, we could use our tractor out here because they found out that they could get foam-filled tires so the tires wouldn't pop. And after using it a couple weeks ago, the tractor tires still look really good. So we're hoping to go with that. And one thing you'll see here where Corey sprayed earlier behind me is the blue dye that we use. When we use an herbicide, we use a surfactant that helps break down the hair and the wax on the leaves so that the herbicide can penetrate the plant and get into the plant and be sucked down into the roots and kill the plants. And the blue dye helps us see where we've already sprayed, because we don't want to spray the same area over and over again. It's too much herbicide at the rates we'd use. It also, we would be wasting herbicide. It's not very efficient and not very environmentally sensitive either. And the dye only lasts maybe a week, and then it just fades away. Stays longer on your hands, but it does wash out real quick on your clothes. Let's see. And then we're not going to mow the weeds back in here. We have no plan to. These are perennial noxious weeds with deep rooting system that spread from seeds as well as from roots. And we don't want to mow it because that really wouldn't do us any good. It's just going to clear off the area for new plants to come in. Plus, pulling a mower with all those tamarisk sticks that we can't see under the knapweed, and some places we can, could really tear up our mower. Challenge that we have is spraying by shrubs with the milestone, because milestone can kill shrubs and trees. So we're careful in the areas we spray around the shrubs, but in some areas you can't avoid it. And we know we're going to go from a high area of high density of knapweed to an area that is like needle in a haystack, trying to find the plants later. Another thing that we've done out here is we've started weed mapping to know what we have and how well our herbicides and controls are working by going back to the same maps and seeing what they show us for how our herbicide's working and what kind of kill we're getting on the noxious weeds. And we are out here monitoring, but we're not out here very often. We don't want to overdo our welcome with accessing the area. And also, we're not going to see if there's a kill until the next season or the next year anyway.
Hi, my name is Corey Lidberg. I'm with the Bureau of Reclamation here in Grand Junction, Colorado. I'm on-the-ground manager for a couple of wildlife areas, including this 40 acres of burn area. Primary contact for spraying and keeping the weeds back on the property. So we have obviously a lot of dead standing cottonwoods that were burned. We're getting some regrowth from the resprouts, but we don't have a public safety concern here, so we decided to leave the majority of the cottonwoods standing and just let them fall on their own. Because even though they are dead, they are still good habitat for eagles and stuff. We have seen a fair amount of wildlife moving back into the area, like deer, and we found some bear scat. And the eagles that were nesting here during the fire, they did come back the following year until their nest got blown out of a tree. So there is habitat potential even with the burnt trees. Since we don't have a water source down here, this is all natural floodplains for the river. We don't have the ability to introduce irrigation, so long-term plans is we would like to replant some cottonwoods and stuff, but we don't know where the water table is at. Once we get some piezometers in and try to figure that out, we can look at planting some of those or going with some upland species like buffalo berry or sumac more, just to try to get the vegetation back and prevent more of the tamarisk and Russian olives from coming back.
One of the things I wanted to bring up too is that we all have limited time that we have to work on these kind of projects. We have lots of other duties that we do, and so we probably should have had a more complete plan for this property, what we have here, what we were going to do to control it, troubleshooting, all kinds of different information. And part of the problem is with your time, how much are you going to do the plan versus how much you can do in the field? And we've chosen more to spend more of our time on the ground in the field with the time that we have, rather than to do a more in-depth plan. A plan would benefit us, but it's just not something we have a lot of time to work on. Also, our grant funding, we're really grateful to Colorado Water Conservation Board and RiversEdge West Tamarisk Coalition for helping us acquire the funding that we need to control the noxious weeds and do the rehab on these properties, because we would not be able to do it on our own. But with the grant and our lessons learned and access to the property, we're not going to be able to seed it before the end of the grant. We're hoping to acquire seed this fall and hold that seed until maybe next fall to plant. The best time of year we found in this area is in the late fall, late winter time, before, in case you get a warm period during the winter, so that seed doesn't sprout and die back again. And that doesn't always coincide with grants and when the funding comes. One of the reasons we're looking at purchasing the seed now is because we had about 139,000 acre fire in this area this summer, just over the mountain from us here, over the Book Cliffs. And they're looking at needing to reseed 20,000 acres. And that seed has to come from somewhere, and we're all competing for it. So we're hoping to get the seed that we need now so that we'll have it when we need it. Another problem is storage of the seed, having the facilities to keep the seed in. There is a place down in Delta that does house the seed, and that's something we'll have to look into. Keeping it on our property, there's potential, but our areas, I mean, you can have mice and different issues get into seed too, keeping it, from freezing, whatever we have to do. And then technology out here, we've used the iPads and to do some of the weed inventory. We would have liked to do more. We do have a cell tower in this canyon. Otherwise, it's difficult to use the iPads and have connectivity to what we need to get the inventory done with the technology we have.
Okay, thank you, Melissa and Corey. Corey's not with us, but for participating in the virtual field trip out at Cameo. So what we're going to do here, we'll have about 10 minutes or so for a Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I do have a question, Melissa, just to start us off. You mentioned the piezometers. I was hoping you could give us an update on where we're at with that, and as well as with the seed and what we ended up doing with those two different components of this project.
Well, we were able to purchase the seed from Southwest Seed, and we were actually able to put most of the seed on the ground. we have that same tractor with the filled tires and a spreader that we used. We got some skunk brush, inland saltgrass, western wheatgrass, Indian rice grass, alkali sacaton, sand drop seed. And then we separated out the Douglas rabbit brush that we'll plant later. We were able to plant that on, we had some snow out there at the end of January, beginning of February. So we went out and planted a lot of that. We still have some that we're going to have to cross a backwater to get into, and we'll hand seed those with whirligigs. It's a smaller portion of the acreage. And as far as the piezometers, we're working with RiversEdge West for funding, and we're hoping to purchase the supplies soon. And we still need to work on our NEPA and clearances to be able to go out and install the piezometers hopefully this fall.
Great, thank you. Let's see, have you seen any propagation of sumac or other native shrubs since the fire?
Not sure about propagation, but yes, a lot of the native sumac has been coming back, as well as the rabbit brush. And so those are species we were hoping to improve out there with additional seeding, especially along the river itself. Most of our work has been away from the river's edge. There wasn't a lot of heavy impact from the burn there. So yeah, we've seen quite a bit and been very encouraged by it.
Great. How well do you feel the efforts to control the white top and Russian knapweed have been?
Actually, pretty good. We've noticed a big change in reduction in the Russian knapweed already. I would say greater than 50%, maybe closer to 75 or 80% reduction. And we're looking forward to checking it out this spring and seeing what we have for Russian knapweed that's coming back, so we can plan for our fall treatment. And as far as white top, that's something we did get a good control on last spring. And we're looking at, going out and monitoring it this spring and spraying again the spots or whatever's needed.
Great. Can you go into the Conservation Corps strike team and the efforts that have been done out there and what we're looking to do here this spring?
Sure, yeah. So RiversEdge West was able to provide us with a strike team of 2 people through Western Colorado Conservation Corps back in January 2019. And the strike team was able to go out and control a lot of the tamarisk that was regrowing out there after the fire. And we're looking at this spring through RiversEdge West and our grant. The strike team will come back out again for 1 week this spring.
Great. We do have a comment. So FYI, Agterra Map It Fast software does not require cell service to collect data. We have very limited cell service where we work, and it has worked well. We use the software on Samsung tablets. It uploads your data when you get back into wireless service. So comment on that. Thanks, Shelley. One thing I did want to point out is the difference between this property that does not have public access and the management strategies versus our next video is going to go into a Colorado Parks and Wildlife site that does have public access. So particularly in relation to the standing cottonwood trees that were burned and leaving those versus having to take them down is a big difference that we'll point out here in the next video. So, okay, anything else you want to add, Melissa, as far as updates or anything that changed since the video?
Not that I can think of. Just want to thank all the folks at Reclamation that supported the project, as well as RiversEdge West and Tamarisk Coalition in the past, and for helping us acquire the funding, and all the folks that were involved in this project. And thanks to Colorado Water Conservation Board for sharing the funding for us. We wouldn't be able to do it without all of you.
Yeah, thank you. I did also want to give a shout out to Colorado Water Conservation Board as well. They have been very flexible with us. This has been a big lessons learned with the fire that went through that area. It burned very hot and intense, especially with climate change and drought. Secondary weeds really put us back, and we were able to be resourceful and flexible. And so I think that's incredibly important, especially moving forward to. This was brought up, I know, in past sessions, but making sure you're flexible with your funding and how you're writing in various implementation tasks in your grant funding. Thank you, Melissa, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, our next video is, the presenter is Pete Furman. He's with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and the video title is Fire Preparedness and Wildfire, Fire Preparedness and Post-Fire Reclamation within James M. Robb, Colorado River State Park. The location is Grand Junction, Colorado.
My name is Pete Furman. I'm the park manager for James M. Robb, Colorado River State Park. We're one park out of 42 in the state of Colorado, and we also are now merged with Division of Wildlife, so it's now Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I manage approximately 35 miles of river access park through the Grand Valley, and I've been here since 2010. The property we're on right now is a property located just west of 29 Road here in Grand Junction. We have multiple properties between 29 and 27.5 roads that are CPW properties, but they're not currently open to the public just because we don't have a trail going through them. So what we've been doing on this property is trying to remove some of the tamarisk and Russian olive, also taking advantage of the fact that we've got time to reclaim it prior to this being open to the public, and also maybe opening up the trail corridor in a fashion that's going to be beneficial in the future. The other thing that's important, I think, in this area anyway, is you do have kind of a wildland-urban interface with a lot of adjoining properties that are not, that are private properties, basically residences, that we want to work with those landowners also. So what we've been able to do in this area is, this is one of multiple properties that I manage that RiversEdge West has been able to assist obtaining funding sources to allow us to do some work and do kind of the initial heavy lifting, getting through this property and doing some of the tamarisk and Russian olive removal. And then also, we've got Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition. I've submitted for a small amount of money with them also, where we can kind of create that defensible space on some of their property as it borders ours. So there's several things we're trying to do, I guess. One, we're trying to improve the habitat value. We're trying to do some fire mitigation, and then also we're trying to prepare it for, once it is time for a trail to go through here, the property will be ready to accommodate that use. One of the challenges we have is we've been able to pull a lot of the tamarisk and Russian olive out. You're always going to have regrowth to kind of stay on top of, but it's a little bit easier at this stage than it was before. But we've got a large amount of biomass, and that's what this is, where it's pulled Russian olive and tamarisk, and it runs roughly 75 yards, and then it's a matter of how do we get rid of this. So that's going to be a component that we need to worry about. And then also is just staying on top of the weeds that have come, were either available in the understory or maybe just a seed bank, but kind of staying on top of the secondary weeds. So we're working with the Palisade insectary, and we've released some gall wasps for the Russian knapweed, depending on distance. Most of that's over there. So we do have some releases over there, so if it's a different part of the property, we still may be using herbicide for that, and then also we're using a herbicide on the smaller resprouts for tamarisk and Russian olive, but the beetle has been present really throughout the valley, and has been helping us kind of keep things in check there also. So the area behind me basically is one of the things we're trying to do with the fire mitigation. The concern is we do have a lot of homeless camps that'll pop up in some of the properties. Again, they're closed to the public, but provide shelter, I suppose. And so some people that don't have a home will stay in these areas, and when they're lighting a fire to stay warm or cook with or something like that, it's understandable, but it does create a fire hazard. And so we do end up in situations where it catches, and then we have a fire in an urban interface, basically. So one of the things we were trying to do is remove a lot of the tamarisk and Russian olive in this area, stack it, which is where I was standing previously, and we've got this large area of biomass now that we've got to figure out how to get rid of, ideally, and that's a challenge in and of itself, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, the goal is to try to create a buffer, try to limit the potential, basically, where we're going to have those type of issues, either by removing fuels or also starting to clear some of this area where it's visible and we at least know whether we've got an issue that we need to address before we do end up with a fire that gets out of control. So within this area, some of the challenges, like I said, we've piled all of the pulled tamarisk and Russian olive or cut Russian olive. We do both of those. We've tried plucking it out of the ground. We've also used Sawyer crews to cut it at its base. Either way, you're going to be spraying for resprouts. And then we've stacked it. So by stacking it, you've got the benefit of at least you've got that defensible space created, but now we'll need to work with Division of Fire Prevention and Control, which is under the Department of Public Safety, to try to get a burn plan put together. They'll need to work with the county to find out an appropriate time to light a fire and allow this to be consumed, and that is a cumbersome process. It takes a while. It's one of the things I can show you over at Connected Lakes a little bit later, but also just discuss it. We've also tried chipping tamarisk and Russian olive, and that's certainly one way to address it, but then where do you take the chips? So I do manage a property near 30 Road here in Grand Junction. We've piled them over there, but the pile is just, at this point, not degrading very quickly. And then we tried spreading them over at Connected Lakes to almost create a weed barrier, for lack of a way to put it, on a section of property that really was mainly Russian thistle. So we weren't as worried about it there, and put about a 5-inch layer of tamarisk and Russian olive chips over in that area. And then we had a visitor try to start a barbecue grill, and they were using natural ground litter, basically blew onto the ground, caught that on fire. My understanding is to put that fire out once it got into all the chips. It was about 1 million gallons that they were pulling out of the lake to try to extinguish that fire. So when you've got that amount of duff on the ground, basically, and it catches on fire, that can create an issue in and of itself. So there's different things we're looking at. There's also incinerators that we're trying to figure out, could we start putting some of this in incinerators and resolve the issue that way. But much of this is, once you remove it, what do you do with it? I still think it's better because we at least don't have the seed source, and then also we've got like I was talking about earlier, we've got greater visibility, and we've got the ability to get the trail through here once it comes time to do that. And I do think that could happen in the near future. Most of the property between 27.5 and 29 is in public ownership. Most of the landowners are working with us, or at least receptive to the potential of having a trail going through this area. So it's quite possible you could have some of that. But I think one of the things that's going to be concerning is there any effort at fire mitigation? The other thing, by clearing this, and gets ahead of ourselves a little bit, but once we're able to actually put a trail through here, it'll be a hardened surface trail. Right now, it's pretty good surface here, but just behind me, you'll start to get into pretty heavy sand. So if you've got a brush truck or something like that, you're not going to want to bring it in an area that has pretty heavy sand. So I think that hardening the surface in this area will also be beneficial. And again, we're going to start working from the other side and start clearing that space also. And ultimately, I think, like I said, you're going to get improved habitat value, we've got one thing that's unique to this area is we've got time. So you do have some salt grass that's already coming in and expanding a little bit. But we've got kochia to control, we've got the knapweed to control, and then we've got the resprouts to control. Those are probably the main things in this area that we're dealing with in terms of secondary weeds. The herbicide we're using for the Russian olive and tamarisk regrowth is kind of a Carlon 3A and 240 mix. We usually mix those up, and we've been spraying in October. And then we're going to probably be spraying a little bit later on this month in terms of the knapweed, where we're not competing with biocontrol. We'll probably use Teller for that. Our vegetative management plan that we completed in-house, and it was revised as recently as 2019, is the suggested recommendations basically on herbicide we'll be using is primarily focused on things that are effective and relatively inexpensive, and that's why we're using those herbicides. We have purchased Esplanade that we've used in the past, and that is fairly expensive, but it's a little more effective on kochia and kind of keeping it down in terms of that long-term control. And that may be something we start to explore in some of these burn areas specifically, where it will help us get ahead. It's really tough for us to mow in the summertime because we're busy doing other things. And so to have a type of weed that you're routinely having to mow over, that's where some of those controls that last a little bit longer may be helpful. Another thing, a little bit of a sidelight, just for folks to consider with the brush hog that we did bring out here, is we've hired contractors sometimes to do some work for us, but we've also done some stuff in-house. And I think how the brush hog was placed, size of the trailer, size of the truck, and things like that, we actually had an accident with the brush hog transporting it from point A to point B. So when you're moving heavy equipment, if that's going to be part of the goal in terms of your controls, just make sure that your ability to move that heavy equipment is within capacity limits, basically on your vehicles and on your trailers, and how it's mobilized on the trailer, how it's secured on the trailer, and make sure you get there safely. The other thing, I guess, as long as we're talking about safety, the other thing I'll mention for your folks doing the field work is we have dropped some larger Russian olive in some of the lakes that we managed previously. And that's, I think there's some benefit of just leaving it there as fish habitat. We've done some of that. We've also pulled some of them out. But, having the right people on a tractor and just making sure you're paying attention to what cuts we've had, because I had one guy jump out of the way of a tractor and land on a newly cut Russian olive, and it tore the inside of his leg up. So these are things that just be safe when you're doing the work. Be safe with the chipper. Drink your water, take your breaks. Don't get heat exhaustion. We've had that go on also. And I think some of that can be depending on the age of your staff and also your volunteers, if you've got volunteer groups. It's worthwhile work, but it's hard work. And I think understanding that also, if you're supervising crews, is good. So we're at Connected Lakes now. In the area specifically we're at, it's an area that got impacted by a fire on July 4th of 2019. Someone was firing off illegal fireworks in the subdivision above the park, caught that area on fire, and then ultimately came into the park, and ember came into the park. Ignition point is about probably 200 yards that way, kind of to the northwest, and then at that point ran up to the east through the park, basically burned a total of 6 acres. You had 2 engine crews basically working the fire in this area, and then also they brought a heavy helicopter out of rifle to provide support also. And I think that's really what ended up being able to put this fire out and keep it at 6 acres. However, in the course of, I think both in terms of the weight of the water dropping on top of the cottonwood trees, that caused some damage to limbs. And the other thing is cottonwoods just don't react well to fire. It ended up costing a lot of the cottonwoods that are in this area. So after the fire was extinguished, and that took about, I think they had it extinguished by about 6 o'clock at night, we had state Forest Service come in and assess the trees as whether they were hazard trees or not. And one of the things with the hazard tree is if it's an area that you're inviting the public to come, that's going to increase the potential safety risks. And then, so all these areas that have trails and all the areas that have benches and are underneath an area that has a cottonwood that either the snag could fall or the whole tree could fall, that contributed to the decision where we ended up taking down a lot of the cottonwoods that were impacted by the fire. You do have some regeneration coming up from the roots, and ecologically, I mean, if it's a cottonwood bush, the ecological benefit is about the same as a cottonwood tree. It just doesn't provide that same shade or anything like that that a larger cottonwood would do for you. In terms of the future use of this area, we're kind of in some preliminary stages. One of the challenges has been getting control of the kochia, and it's just uneven terrain, and then also a lot of the down cottonwoods makes it more difficult to mow this area and try to stay on top of the kochia. But we'll try to do a little bit better job next year for that. But another thing that's being discussed right now is possibly shaving down some of the soil in this area, or excavating out some of the soil and then putting it into the lake in certain areas, and improve your wetland habitat in the lake. The seed bank, the seed bank that contains a lot of weeds, but it's an upland seed bank. Move that into an aquatic environment, and so you don't end up with those seeds germinating. And then this brings this to a little bit lower water table. It also gives us an opportunity where we've gotten rid of the seed bank and we can kind of start fresh and try to reestablish some vegetation in here, improve this 6 acres, and also improve some of the wetland habitat in the lake. There's another parcel that we have, or it's another section of the park that's kind of northwest of here that will do the same thing in that area, where we'll scrape soil that has a pretty heavy upland seed bank, moving into an aquatic environment. There being that seed wouldn't generate then, the aquatic environment would be improved passively, basically, by ducks coming in to utilize that area, and that somewhat happens now. And then also we'd have a little bit better luck with the upland reclamation of that area also. So I've shared you kind of a preliminary plan that was done with that purpose. I've been in conversations with some of my colleagues on the wildlife side of the agency, seeing if this could fit in terms of a larger landscape plan, and we're looking at really all CPW properties throughout the valley and trying to, rather than worry about a specific 6 acres at connected lakes, looking more along the lines of a landscape scale, all CPW properties throughout the valley, and see if there's things we can do to improve the overall habitat value, leveraging a variety of funds, whether it's CPW funds, whether it's continuing to work with RiversEdge West, Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition. Those are different options in terms of trying to support the end goal of improving the habitat value, decreasing the risk of fire, and providing visitors a safe place to enjoy. So one of the things that's been a little bit of a challenge in this area is once we have done removal of tamarisk and Russian olive, or when we have a fire go through and we have to take down cottonwood trees that are deemed as hazardous. It's kind of the public interaction and public reaction to some of those decisions. And, you know, I think a big part of my job is people management and explaining why we're doing certain things. But it seems like over time, concerns start to mitigate or maybe moderate, is a better way to put it. When the fire hit, we immediately had visitors wanting to know why was the trail closed. And so it was constantly, well, the trail's closed for the hazard trees, and some people would bypass anyway. So then it was, well, you take down the hazard trees. Well, why did you take down the hazard trees? So explain why we felt they were hazardous and why we made the decision to drop them. And now we're kind of in a phase of, what are you going to do now that you've dropped them? And so, you know, we're looking at, all right, now we can move them and create fill in they would have a role to play in terms of fill in the lakes. So it's kind of this constant explanation. This is why we're doing what we're doing. This is why you're seeing what you're seeing, and trying to elicit the public support. The reclamation part of this, that's where I think you start to receive a little bit better feedback or acceptance from the public. So when they do see some of the cottonwoods coming back from the root system, when they do see you're actively trying to reclaim an area, I think that's helpful. It has been a challenge in terms of reclaiming this area, and I think, again, by lowering the topography and getting a little bit closer to the water table, I think that's going to help with the reclamation. Also getting rid of the competing seed banks, that's going to help with the reclamation also. For the most part, the areas that we've had success at connected lakes with reclamation, it's been involved one of two things. Either you take potted plants, deep root plants, so we were able to acquire some things that had the root system was already about 24 inches in length. That's close to the water table anyway when we get to it. Those seem to have performed better than others. We've had some pretty good success with buffalo berry in the area, and New Mexico privet has also done well. Sumac has done well, and you can look around, and Sumac does well on its own out here. And then if we can get right next to the water table, cottonwoods have done well too. There's a north bench, basically there's 20 acres kind of on the north side of the park that we worked on back in 2012. It was cleared of all the tamarisk and Russian olive, and at that time, you know, the people that I was dealing with in the public were arguing that, well, it looks like a bomb blew up. Well, we got rid of all the tamarisk and Russian olive, and their perception was that was like a bomb went off. So subsequent to that, we have been able to, and quite successful in that area. We used hydroseeding basically, and that proved to be pretty effective. We were originally planning on putting in some cottonwood pole plantings in that area. And we kept on hitting concrete blocks, cars, trucks, different things like that were used as riprap in the subsoil. It protected the lakes, but it made reclamation, especially with something you're trying to punch a hole in the ground, very difficult. So we turned around and used some of those funds instead of trying to put cottonwoods in. We just ended up putting native grasses in, and the native grasses have actually done pretty well. And then when we have flood events, and that area does support some flood events, we are seeing some cottonwoods coming in from seed, and that's an area we've been able to do a pretty good job of keeping any regrowth of tamarisk and Russian olive at bay, and also supporting that those grasses. One of the things it's going to be moved into endangered fish lake, but part of what we're doing also is by cutting the other 10 acres down and moving that as fill into endangered fish lakes. If you look at that area right now, you'll see there's not a lot growing. That's an area we tried doing some seeding with straw, and it didn't take. And then we've also tried kind of disturbing the soil kind of in different pockets. So you have a soil that has several different pockets throughout it, and that water, the hope is water can accumulate in those basins. And it's just been very arid since we tried to do that, and we haven't seen a lot germinating. There's some, but that's just an area the last few years where we continue to suffer from drought, where we're getting those type of things to germinate is tough. And I think if we can get some flooding again, if we can get some more moisture, the seed should still be viable, and maybe we'll have some success. But so far we haven't seen much over there, so it's a little bit concerning as far as that's concerned. You need water, and water can be difficult in this area because it doesn't naturally flood anymore. So it's in this area, it would be requiring us to use mechanical means. Areas that we've had success with irrigation and cottonwoods, if you can flood irrigate, you can get cottonwoods. If you can't flood irrigate, you're probably not going to do it. So this is going to be more grasses and stuff like that. And then, again, maybe some of the cottonwoods coming up from the root systems and regerminating that way.
Okay, thank you, Pete. So we will open it up for questions. It looks like we have a few that came in, so, or rather a comment, which I'll go ahead and just read. FYI, in regards to wood chips, we have mulch specs for chip size to be no more than 3 to 6 inches in 3 to 6 inch pieces and no more than 6 inches in depth and spread out across the project area. We have no issues with existing vegetation growing back through it, and it provides a good seed bed for broadcast seeding at those specs. We have found it dramatically degrades within a few years semi-arid climate within riparian corridors. Pete, I don't know if you want to comment on that at all in regards to the size of the chips and what was used to connect it, and then you alluded to this already in your video, but the wildfire danger with that, particularly in these urban wildland interfaces.
Yeah, a couple things. One, we have a property east of 29 Road. So the first part of the video, I was west of 29 Road, where it was basically masticated. And you kind of saw some of the stuff with connected lakes also. With the mastication, those are usually larger, chips. Those don't seem to be degrading very quickly. But then also there's a lot of river cobble, which makes it a little bit more difficult to, bury those in the soil. I do think there's a potential that if we buried the piles we have over at 30 Road, those went through a wood chipper, so they're actually fairly small chips that maybe we can get it to grade a little bit quicker. One of the concerns I've had anyway is just soil chemistry and things like that. And what will that do to your soil chemistry if you're taking salt cedar chips basically and putting them into the soil? What is that going to do? So that's been one of the concerns where we haven't tried to do that. One of the things I'm hoping to do eventually is get some sort of an incinerator. So that's something I've been working closely with Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition, and Colorado State Forest Service has a grant program where we may be able to get something like that. And I know Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control is pursuing that also, or we could just simply work with them to have an open burn. If folks are having experience with burying it and having it degrade without impacting soil chemistry, that's certainly something I'd be interested in, if that can be shared later on.
Great. You just mentioned the Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition. I was hoping you could go into a little more detail on that group, kind of where they're at, your involvement with it. I know you're on the board, and what they're working towards within the Grand Valley.
So I think what they're working for, as far as the Grand Valley, is it's several different public and private entities. I mean, you've got a realtors associations associated with it. They're the ones that actually funded the grant that was north of where I was talking about initially, in terms of that wildland urban interface. You also have fire departments. You have, Department of Health in terms of air quality. So there's several different groups that are involved in that. The goal being, one, we don't want wildland fires impacting homes, but also wildland fire is going to generate a lot of air pollution too. So we're trying to figure out like-minded goals where we can all contribute and see something to fruition. So with that group, what we ended up doing is clearing an access point. So you've got emergency access, better emergency access to the north of that property, where they don't have to worry about the sands as much. They've got some areas that are good escape zones. They've got better access in terms of river emergencies also. It's not necessarily wildland fire, but by clearing some of that stuff out, it's helpful for that too. And then you also had the homeowners, and I don't think the homeowners have the financial means that they could have done this on their own, where they are able to create a little bit more of a defensible space between our property and their property, so that you lessen the potential for catastrophic wildland fires. Grand Valley Power was another group that actually helped us with that. So I think the benefit of Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition, I think, is kind of seeing if there's areas that multiple different agencies can work together, including Tamara's or RiversEdge West, can work together to all create a goal that's mutually beneficial in terms of wildland protection, habitat improvement, and habitat value, homeowners value, and get creative on what we're trying to do and leverage resources to accomplish this.
Great. And Rusty, I know you're on the board as well. If you wanted to chime in at all, feel free.
Thanks. No, Pete, I think covered it really well. I think the bottom line, not that it's our only concern or goal, but for RiversEdge West mission, I think it's important that we take a look at how some of these destructive wildfires are happening more frequently and more destructive along our riparian areas. And this Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition, and in conjunction with state, local agencies, nonprofits, businesses, can kind of start chipping away at that mitigation and the likelihood that these fires will continue to happen, because we know it's going to be warm and dry and so I think those things are going to persist, and we have to find ways to band together to do that. And those wildfire coalitions are a great way to do that. So I encourage you, if you have a wildfire coalition in your neighborhood, to get connected with them, because they can help with rivers and stream restoration like we are.
Great, thank you. Pete, another question for you. Regarding scraping the topsoil with weed seeds, is there any concern about the water level in the lakes dropping and having the weedy species reestablishing? Also, is there a strategy for rebuilding the topsoil removed?
Okay, so as far as the first part, I'm not terribly concerned about lake levels dropping, just because Redlands Tail Race, which runs by the area, City of Grand Junction actually has the water rights, but they are allowing us to use the water rights for a variety of purposes, to include maintaining it for habitat and also maintaining recreation. So we've got the ability to manipulate water levels in that area. So I'm not as worried about that, unless for some reason Redlands Tail Race went dry and stayed dry. As far as the scraping of the topsoil with the weed seeds and what are we going to have underneath, I think much of it is because before this became a state park, a lot of it was a gravel pit, and then it was also flooded periodically until some of those banks were built up. So it's a lot of gravel and it's a lot of sand. So we'll kind of look at what the soil conditions are once we scrape, and if there's need to amend it, we can certainly do that. But right now, just looking at it, I'm guessing it's going to be similar all the way through the profile, which is going to be a lot of sand, a lot of gravel. Then it looks like someone else is just talking about massive weed explosions. I think that, again, one of the things we need to do with and there's not as much. There is some tumbleweed in there. There's a bunch of kochia. One of the things we are trying to do is remove some of the cottonwoods that we took down. Some of it will be used for fill in terms of the wetland proposal, and that's just at 30% design build right now, so it's not fully fleshed out. But I've requested money for planning to mitigate some of these concerns, and then I guess the other thing we're doing is giving firewood. We're allowing people to come in and collect the things that can be moved by hand and use that as firewood and getting that off the side, because one of the things we are having a difficult time with kochia and tumbleweed and everything else popping into that area is getting equipment around down trees to be able to either spray herbicide or mow or any of those type of things. So that is one of the things that we're trying to do right now. So I think if we scrape it, it's going to be a little bit easier to get in and start doing some of those things like mowing and also spraying and then reseeding. And then we also have irrigation. We've got an irrigation wheel basically that was previously purchased by RiversEdge West that we should be able to irrigate and get some grasses going in.
You did answer one of the questions. Could wood chips be made available to the public as free mulch if there isn't a concern for using tamarisk and Russian olive wood chips for landscaping? You did say that the firewood was going to be, or the wood was going to be made available to the public.
Yeah, the down cottonwood is made. I mean, if someone wants to burn the salt cedar, I guess I wouldn't be opposed, but it does. It's not terribly chainsaw friendly, and I'm not sure what the quality would be in terms of burning. I haven't seen any of the research in terms of increasing soil salinity one way or another. It's just anecdotally, I would think if it's salt cedar and it decomposes, would that increase salinity? So I guess some of this stuff, and one of the things I think that are beneficial with this symposium and conference is sharing of information. So I guess if there is information out there, I'm certainly willing to look at it and see if there's something better that we can do, because we do have biomass to address. And we've only had one DFPC, which is who is authorized to burn on state property. They've had one controlled burn since I've been here. And so it's a cumbersome process basically to consume it that way. So if there's better ways to do it, I mean, you could bury it, you could haul it to the landfill. I'm not sure how well those do. But yeah, we've got to figure out some way to mitigate this.
Yeah, if anyone does have any resources on that, Shelley did comment. I think there is research has shown that tamarisk wood does not increase soil salinity, but if there are any resources, feel free to put them in the chat box if you're familiar with any of them, and we can follow up on that later as well. I will read, let's see, seems like switching to the native grass seed may have been a good approach, potentially prepping the site for future germination. At the site you mentioned around the lake, complex lake, connected lakes. Good lesson on addressing restoration needs with limited means. So yeah, that's a great comment.
Yeah, I'm going to take that as what it pertains to the North Bank, basically. So yeah, that actually has been really successful. One thing that's been interesting in that area is because it is opened up and we don't have thick stands of Russian olive and tamarisk, we are starting to deal with some social trails in that area. So we'll have to address that because that's starting to knock back some of the vegetation. But really, there hasn't been that much regrowth in terms of weeds in that area. The bank itself is pretty good. We're just dealing with social trails.
Great. Pete, do you have an update on the wetlands project that you talked about and whether you applied for that funding or not?
I did apply for funding, and that'll bring what is currently a 30% design build to a 60% design build. And the feeling is at that point, we can go ahead and start implementing some of the proposals. We do have, but then that's going to be, I'm going to have to request funding to actually implement it. Some of that we'll be able to mitigate because we do have our own heavy equipment and our own heavy equipment operator. So in terms of adjusting depth profiles and things like that, that's something we should be able to do in-house, and also water control structures. We should be able to do a lot of that stuff in-house.
Great. I have one last question for you in regards to education and outreach. Is there any plans within the sites that we toured today with your video for public education through interpretive signs? Or I know that park rangers make a lot of comments with visitors when you're on site. Is there any other plans for doing anything more than that?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do, and this ties into also the relationship with Two Rivers Wildfire Coalition. I think we've got the opportunity to put up some new signs. It's just a matter of finding funding for the new signs. But I think you could talk about the need to be careful with fireworks and not catch the fire, not catch the neighborhood on fire. I think you could do that. You could talk a little bit about the riparian restoration, the ongoing relationship that we've had with Tamara's Coalition, how long it takes for these cottonwoods to get to that size, why, what is a hazard tree. I think there's all sorts of things that you could educate the public on. And, the area is going to look different for decades. And I think because of that, you've got an opportunity to explain why it looks different, and also maybe make sure people understand the impact of fire in our area and the danger of fire in our area. Fortunately, there were no houses destroyed in that fire, but it was pretty close. And then obviously a lot of the park was destroyed or impacted, and it's not going to be the same.
Sure. That just sparked another question with that fire and the available resources that happened to be available that day, and what that could have looked like otherwise.
I'm sorry, I was reading the chat. Can you ask your question again?
Sure. So what the resources that were available that day to fight the fire at Connected Lakes, sure, and what that would have looked like had those resources not been available, maybe the delicate balance there.
You need water to put out a fire. And I think, the helicopter they brought in out of Rifle, and I don't know how many gallons it pulls, but it was one of the big Chinooks, so 2 rotors, and it was putting the snorkel into Connected Lakes and then dropping it. I would guess probably 10,000 gallons of water per drop. And so, yeah, it was effective in terms of stopping the spread. That fire, it started probably around 1 o'clock, and I was actually off park getting gas, but I was line of sight, so I was about 2 miles away. Got to the park, tried to start closing section of the park to try to make sure people were safe, and literally turned around and the park was on fire. And probably within 10 minutes, it had spread from ignition point to 6 acres. So that helicopter was huge. And then having the wildland fire folks come down and help kind of create a fire line and keep it from expanding beyond 6 acres. If we didn't have those folks, it would have continued to burn. The park's about 180 acres. Could have hit that, could have hit the subdivision up above, could have hit Autobahn's property and run along Dyke Road here in Grand Junction. So once things start to burn, it just gets hotter and hotter and burns more and more property.
Okay, thank you. One last comment before we move on to the next video. Eric says, I would love to hear how the kochia and grass seed mix battle plays out in the future. Thank you. Yeah,
I'd be happy to be back and try to change my monotone maybe a little bit. So keep everyone awake. The thing I've seen with kochia is I think we need to mow it, but we need to have access to mow it, because otherwise it'll take over. The grasses do seem to survive a little bit. Shrubs not so much, even if they've got something on top of them providing some shade. I think it's helpful, but ultimately it's something we need to control. What else we got?
Let's see, just another comment. FYI, again, we were able to meet our mulch specs by using the appropriate equipment. Pulled trees, our windrowed, and then mulch with a 275 Braun track mulcher with a SEPI, I think that's how you say it, drum head. So sounds like there's definitely some resources and different options out there for the mulch, which is good to know, you know, as far as
Sure.
And I think too, Pete, for you have particularly at Connected Lakes where you have a lot of barbecue grills that you mentioned and people fishing, and you have a lot of visitation going on down there, and how that plays into where you decide to either leave the mulch, remove it, use it somewhere else, as was apparent that happened with the fire with the wood chips, that you were trying to combat the weeds and it turned into a wildfire.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like we have lots of great comments in here. I really appreciate the awesome discussion that's happening here.
Yeah,
I think that was, make sure I caught everything here. Pete, do you have anything else to add with the comments that have come in?
No, I appreciate it. And if I assume that you'll be able to accumulate some of these comments and things like that. And it's certainly things that I'm willing to consider. And this is just a learning process. And it seems like it's constantly something where you react. We've had some of the same issues that Melissa was talking about in terms of thorns and popping tires. You know, we added foam in terms of one of our tractor tires, and that affected the axle of the tractor tire. So it's just, you're constantly reacting as things change, and learning and moving on and trying to make things better. I do think if you look at the condition of the park that we've had since when I came here, and much of this is RiversEdge West, it's much better than when I got here. So that's what we're trying to do.
Well, like you said in your video, it's rewarding work, but it's hard work, and it takes a lot of time and over a lot of years. So, okay. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, again, feel free to put in the chat box if you have any additional questions. We're going to have one last video, and then I'm actually going to bring all the presenters back up just in case we have any other discussions. So feel free to keep the questions and the comments rolling. Thank you for your time, Pete.
Yep.
Okay, the next presenters are Kevin Hyatt, Aaron Kowalski, and Marlon DeRoss with Bureau of Land Management. The video was taken near the Book Cliffs, north of Grand Junction, Colorado. And the title of the video is Pine Gulch Fire Impacts and the Work That Goes into Suppression, Repair, and Restoration.
I'm Erin Kowalski out of the Grand Junction Field Office for the BLM. I'm a rangeland management specialist, and I have a really strong background in ecology. So the Pine Gulch Fire is here in western Colorado. We're considered high desert. The town of Grand Junction is 4,600 feet, and I think the fire was pretty close to that, maybe 5,000 feet. And then it started in the lower PJ, Saltbrush communities, and by the end had gone all the way up into like Aspen type community. So a lot of dry in the desert, and then we even had, a little bit more of the mountain type ecosystem, but it was also dry as well, so it burned really quickly. When it was all said and done, the fire burned 138,000 acres, which is about 1/10 of our field office here in Grand Junction. And at the time, they were boasting that it was the largest Colorado fire in history. And I think we had that record for 48 days before Cameron Creek blew that out of the water, and it grew to over 200,000 acres. I think for Colorado, this was a huge year. We had never seen that much fire activity, and resources were really spread thin. So, as a resource advisor, we're out there working alongside the firefighters, and the ultimate goal is safety. And so we come in with the resources in mind, but ultimately safety of personnel and structures is the primary goal. So having that in mind, putting bulldozer line in is a great way to make a fire break. Bulldozers are used a lot to help with fire suppression on really big fires. And a lot of times they back burn off of it. And when they put in the dozer line, every office is different, whether it's Forest Service or BLM or Park Service. But our field office, if it was along a pre-existing route, that was usually a pretty safe bet that it may have been cleared for cultural stuff before, and we might already know some of the sensitive plant populations. The fire did burn up into sage grouse territory up on top, just a little bit of it. So that was another big concern, is sage grouse. So for guiding the dozer line, we would look at some of the information that we already had and try to guide them to avoid plants or animals or sage grouse lecks.
Hello, my name's Marlon. I'm the Monitoring and Weeds Coordinator for the Grand Junction BLM office here, and this is one of the areas that they did a backburn on. They, as you guys saw walking in, they kind of dozed a line in and out of this riparian area all the way down to Munger Creek, just to make sure that the backburn didn't bleed onto the highway. Originally it was a big sagebrush flat here, and it was just mostly like cheatgrass and annual wheat and crested wheat kind of grasses. And so for us, one of our main concerns was the riparian areas and protecting the cottonwoods from the backburn. Even though we did have to doze into some of the riparian areas, I still think we did a good job of keeping it mostly on the other side and keeping those unburned.
Hi, my name is Kevin Hyatt. I'm a hydrologist with the Grand Junction Field Office BLM. My job as a hydrologist and on the fires, a resource specialist, and then I did help assist in the burned area emergency response, or BEAR, effort after the fire. As a hydrologist and person that helps to evaluate impacts to the stream systems and riparian areas, we're out here as a hydrologist. I'm specifically trying to help with that a lot of times, and so we're trying to direct these resources to perform tactics that are least impactful, and so when they're making a decision to put a control line across a riparian area or a drainage, we're trying to get them to put it in good locations. The direction that they want to cross the drainages is important, because our riparian areas are probably a very limited resource on our field office, and so protecting those is pretty important. Our concern about infestation of damaging weeds post-fire after putting a blade through or using a dozer through some of those areas, and so trying to minimize that actual disturbance of the organic layer that is the topsoil that really grows well in there. Disrupting flows in those channels is pretty important, because these banks are highly erosive and can be easily altered. And so, what we try to do is, they'll give us information about where they want to put the line, and then, we go out and we scout that and try to provide input on how they can change those, in short time frames. We identify, with information that we have prior to the fire, where our areas are that are most important, and we provide that information through maps and that sort of thing. Water quality is a big issue too. The increased sediment that's going to be caused by this, we don't want to cause to be higher if we can, and so trying to avoid the riparian areas is our first tactic. Again, direction and where we put that line through riparian area is important. And again, the objective for our protecting our riparian areas is avoidance, and you're probably going to get tired of me saying that, but it really is the most effective. But oftentimes, besides heavy equipment or mechanical equipment on the ground, we're fighting these fires with aerial resources such as helicopters and fixed wing airplanes, and they're using retardant and bucket drops. And specific to Grand Junction and a lot of other field offices, there's guidance in our resource management plans on, distances from riparian areas that we'd like to see retardant drops occur. And so we often inform the firefighting decision makers of these locations we would like to have retardant avoidance areas, and not use retardant in those areas, or even water from other sources into different drainages. Sometimes that occurs where we don't want, somebody picking up a bucket of water and one drainage over into another because of the fish habitat or some special species of wildlife or fauna we have in there. And so they generally try to keep retardant drops out of the drainages in as far as ways they can. But when they do occur, often what we do is mostly just do a report of occurrence and document that occurrence when it happens. And there's a national database that goes into, and the folks that manage that database and then kind of take a look at how often that's occurring. But retardant is, it's full of phosphorus, so it's in systems such as ours that are phosphor limited. It can cause some post-fire water quality impacts, and but we just try to avoid putting retardant there. So during the suppression repair activities, the resource advisors, we go out there and we try to help return the disturbances back to as close as the original condition as possible, and that occurs in the uplands as well as in the riparian areas. One of the things that we look at in the riparian areas when they do happen to disturb those areas, or drive across the stream, or put a dozer line across the stream, whether it be light or pretty heavy-handed. One of the things that we really try to do is, again, put it back to an existing condition. And one of the easiest ways that I've found to do that in situ, working with an equipment operator who is normally just is not just a construction worker, but somebody who normally just does construction or is out there doing big earth moving projects. These guys are out there in their normal job just getting paid to move dirt, right? Not put dirt back. So what I have these folks do, what I try to do is I try to get them out of their piece of equipment, and I walk them up and down and just have them take a look at that riparian area and that channel shape and what's there above and below their disturbance, and tell them that's what I want to see after they get done doing that work. And what I'm really looking for is main channel shape. In a good intermittent or perennial stream, you can see a defined bed and bank, and you can see floodplain features. You can see the shapes of those outer terrace walls, and so that's what we request them to do, is just try to put it back to that shape as much as possible. If we have instances where they've removed larger clumps of the matting or the sod, we try to get them to place that back into position that it previously was. But at the end of the day, we try to get it to look as close to what it did prior to the activity. And what we're finding in what's been more common these days is trying to get specific pieces of equipment, specifically track hose, excavators that have arms that have thumbs on them so they can pick up stuff and do a little bit more fine detailed work for us, rather than just using the dozers that probably put the line in to start with. That being said, dozers can be successful, and we're not trying to spend a bunch more money, fixing things or making it look landscaped, but those excavators are really more successful at that suppression, repair, and rehabilitation effort than going back with those larger pieces of equipment like dozers and graders. So, but really, it's about trying to make it as close to what it is prior to that disturbance. We probably wouldn't concentrate on doing any kind of shrub or tree planting, because hopefully the disturbance was minimized prior to that, or avoided removing some of those trees. So oftentimes we don't, do larger plantings, but sometimes seeding will help to protect those banks for us.
Having them during the fire.
Yeah, and so the tactics we'd like to see in those riparian areas is, number one, avoidance. But if we can't, then the next thing we really try to do is get those folks to lift that blade as much as they can, to just remove what is absolutely necessary. And I think as a resource advisor, that's pretty important job for you to help those operators understand is, when you're going through there, lift that blade so you're just barely scalping that combustible vegetation and not taking that really important soil surface, and that's important for regrowth after the event. So in the post-fire assessment process that we went through, the burned area emergency response action is there's two steps or two phases in that process, and bear itself is really about emergency stabilization. We're worried about the very first precipitation event that could cause impacts to values at risks. And so that's called ES, emergency stabilization, and that's the first year after the fire. And so that bear assessment is really to evaluate that need to help protect values at risk. And so funding that's available for that comes from the same funding that fire suppression uses. So there's I'm not going to say an unlimited amount, but there's kind of an open account there that can be used to spend money for that emergency 1 year post-fire stabilization impacts. And it's not competitive, and so that's why it's important for us to get in here quick to really ascertain what's needed in that first year, or even in before that first precipitation event, because this was kind of an end of the year fire. If this had happened in June, we'd have been worried about that monsoonal moisture coming in August. That would have been the storm we're worried about. And so that's kind of the storms we're worried about now is, we need to get this stabilization done before those first storms. So outside of the ES, or the emergency stabilization time period, we have the BAR, the burned area rehabilitation process. And in BLM, that plan, those two, ES and BAR, there's another term for it. It's called ES and R, emergency stabilization and rehabilitation. BLM kind of puts both of those together. Other agencies do ES and BAR separately, but the BEAR can do just an ES plan or a BAR plan, or sometimes they put them both together for places. And so we developed an ES and BAR plan for the Pine Gulch fire, and that BAR plan is 4 years, 3 years of additional funding, and that funding is competitive. So what we decide to do for the long-term stabilization, we have to put into a plan and submit to the agency, and the agency administrators then decide how much funding we get. And so we can request, however much money we think we need, but then at the end of the day, we could get some of it, or all of it, or none of it, depending on how many other fires across the nation are burning. And this year, California, Oregon, and Washington, all tons of other BLM fires across the nation had occurred, and so that BAR funding is going to be pretty competitive.
In the grand scheme of things, we'd like to seed more than we can, but feasibility always is in play. Since this was almost 140,000 acres, we obviously couldn't reseed all of it. And after we had done our on-the-ground monitoring with the bear team, we realized that the severity wasn't as bad as we thought. So a lot of these ecosystems have evolved with fire, especially the oak brush communities. A lot of them were already resprouting. So some of the higher elevations get a little bit more moisture, and those are probably going to come back a little bit easier without help from, you know, an outside resource like seeding. The areas that were a little bit lower in elevation, we looked at those, especially some of them have a lot of cheatgrass encroachment. The land health data that we had collected prior may have not been as bad. The land health data that we collected prior helped determine kind of those areas. So using all these criteria, our ecologists kind of plugged in to our GIS, elevation, slope, historic land health data, and just vegetation type. And with that, we were able to come up with some polygons for priority areas to reseed. And as Kevin touched on, since this year is competitive with money, it's also been really competitive with the seed sources. So we have a warehouse that we go out of, the BLM, but we're competing with other states and other fires for that. So we had to really kind of tweak our seed mix. But ultimately, we're seeding the areas that need help with stabilization of the soil and trying to get some of those natives to come back a little bit better.
You know, it's pretty well known that, you know, post-fire erosion increases and changes in hydrology are expected, but along with that normal vegetation that was here, one of the things that also really is detrimental in this fire is the steep slopes that this fire burnt in. Over 65% of the fire was on slopes greater than 35%, so that just adds to what's going to happen, you know, with the next round of moisture that comes in here.
We're only seeding the areas that are flatter just because the chance of the success is a lot greater. So the best way to do that is to aerial seed that. So using airplanes and on some of the dozer lines are using helicopters to lay down that seed. We try to, as much as we can, seed in the winter, hoping for snow to help kind of solidify that and kind of get the soil, the seed to soil contact, and then also give it a little bit of a jump start with the moisture.
The Grand Junction Field Office has had a really successful aquatic inventorying and monitoring program, AIM program, and which is a national effort to go out and assess the health of the BLM lands. And so we're going to continue with the AIM monitoring in our plots that we've had. We'll probably establish a few new places.
It's usually a crew of 3 that comes out, and they do, you know, soil pit and kind of try to texture out the soils and take photos, and they do line point intercept and species richness, things like that, to just give us a better idea of what's really out there. And so we asked for funding for the next 4 years to have a crew come out and go to locations spread out all throughout the fire and just kind of see what different parts of the Pine Gulch fire look like, how the seeding's giving us a better idea, you know, if there was seeding there, how that seeding is going. And I do anticipate us adding targeted points onto the Pine Gulch fire burn area, just so we can capture how the seeding is doing and things like that.
We also have an aquatic assessment, inventory, and monitoring program where we go out and do protocols in the stream to monitor fire. And we have a lot of that information prior to this fire, and so we'll continue with that effort. In addition, we've had a lot of universities and other organizations reach out to us wanting to gather information about the effects of this fire into the Colorado River. So we're going to be doing a few other things in the fire to, you know, kind of look at hill slope type monitoring efforts to see how things are really reacting.
Historically, we have a lot of data in this area. We've been treating weeds out here for many years, and you know, some of the main weeds that we were looking at was like Russian knapweed and white top and hound's tongue in the higher elevation. And we did receive money, and so we're hoping to have a weeds crew out next spring and they're going to start surveying the areas, you know, mostly along roads and where the dozer lines were put in. That's kind of our highest priority, and from there they'll start treating. And so we just are going to try to get a start on that before they take over, and hopefully give the seed a chance to take over.
We come out here after the fire or work on the fire that's quiet and do what we call suppression repair, and that's help guide resources in repairing the damage that occurred through suppression activities. And then post, kind of after that step, a lot of times, or what can occur is that BEAR team, or that burned area emergency response team, can be requested. And there's a National Department of Interior DI BEAR team coordination program. They come in and evaluate whether a BEAR response is needed, and it was determined that a BEAR response was needed here because of one, the lack of folks to help in a BEAR assessment. We just didn't have the personnel out in the field office to provide that BEAR assessment methodologies and staffing. We had staff out on this fire for 45 up to 45 days, and so we were just running out of people. So that was one of the criteria. We had some values at risk that were pretty important, and so those values at risk needed to be evaluated by folks to help really ascertain the level of threat to those. But what that BEAR team does is it comes in here and it really takes a look at how the fire burned. And there's a couple things that we do to evaluate that. First, we look at the vegetation severity, burn severity, and that's how much of the vegetation on the landscape is consumed in this fire. And we look at that through aerial imagery, and they classify that to tell us, categorize that burn severity into low, medium, and high burn severities, and then, or unburned within the fire perimeter. But then what we do is we go out and we take that information and we look at the soils to develop a soil burn severity map. And the reason we do that is because studies have shown that it's the soil characteristics and how that fire interacted with the soils that really help to inform the changes in soil and erosion and potential issues to values at risk. And so when we go out and we go out as in teams, and we actually do field data collection and look at 5 factors in the soil. Some places do a little bit more in-depth things, but we really try to just look at those 5 factors due to time, and those are vegetation, how much of the vegetation was consumed. That's not only the canopy vegetation or the stuff you can see on top of the ground, but that litter and duff layer, that dead material that's sitting on the ground. We look how much of that consumes. We look at the roots in the soils. How far into the soils were the roots damaged? So we dig into the soil and take a look at those roots. We look at soil structure. As fires get hotter, the structure of that soil can be altered, and that's pretty important. We look at hydrophobicity, which is water repellency. Will precipitation that falls on land be able to soak into the ground? Sometimes you can have natural hydrophobicity due to drought conditions, and I think, and then some soils just have natural hydrophobicity. So we go and look at what the natural conditions should be and compare that to what the post-fire conditions are, and try to ascertain what those conditions are. And the other one we look at is ash color. Ash color and depth help us determine how bad the soils were affected. And we take all that information and we put it through some models to help evaluate how much increase in soil and erosion that we are going to have on this fire. The lucky thing that we had with this fire is I think it burned so hot and so fast that the residence time on the land itself was short-lived, and so we didn't have a lot of heating of that soils. Early on in the fire we were able to go look at some of the colder areas, and we were finding very low soil burn severity in places where it looked like the vegetation had just been removed quite heavily, and we were seeing green grass and things growing back before the fire was even out. So that was all good news. We expect that because of that low soil burn severity, recovery should be on track with what it normally should be. But again, the steep slopes and the highly erosive soils is still pretty important there. And then, we take that information and put it into a report that is provided to the field office to help determine on how we want to do post-fire rehab. Seeding is probably one of the things that is going to be the most effective for our area because of the flat areas that you can see behind us. We'll take the seed pretty well. We won't do anything on real steep slopes other than there might be some post-fire data collection for university studies or USGS studies that we'll be proposing to do out there. And then there's all the infrastructure rehabilitation that we're going to have to take care of. We burn up a lot of fences, we burn up a lot of road signs and trail signs. There's some road infrastructure that we'll deal with, but for the most part, I think a lot of our BLM primitive road systems are just going to need some maintenance and some post-fire storm patrols to help manage and clean it up after the events occur, because it's cheaper to do that than to try to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of seed or mulch out on this landscape, because it's just ineffective and that sort of thing. But again, this fire is the biggest thing this field office has ever seen, and there's a lot of work to come, and we'll probably be surprised by some things that happen, and but we'll all try to learn from it and pass that on to whoever needs it.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Okay, we will open it up for Q&A. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat box. Kevin, I'll start off. Just recently in the paper this week, the aerial spraying, or the aerial seeding, not spraying, was occurred. So I wanted you to give us an update on that. You're on mute, Kevin.
Absolutely. We successfully got a contract awarded to a vendor out of here in Colorado, and they came to town earlier this week, and they successfully completed, as of this morning, all 22,000 acres of the burned area polygons that we selected. And so the seed has been applied out there. The suppression repair seeding, that seeding is being completed by our fire crew, and they're actually doing a lot of that by hand just because of the contractual process that kind of threw us a curveball. So we said, well, let's just get the fire crew out there. They're kind of a slow period for them, so they're out doing that work right now for us. But the bulk of that 22,000 acres is completed. Went off without a hitch. And one of the comments made by a pilot that I spoke with yesterday said the conditions in which they spread the seed upon for most of the Pine Gulch fire was some of the best conditions has seen as far as snow and conditions that will make it favorable for that seed to take for us. So we're pretty excited to hear about that. We also spread seed on some of our smaller fires that we had, the Hunter Fire, the Cedar Canyon Fire. Those fires also got seeded in that project too. So we bought the seed, got spread, and we're done. Wait for it to grow.
Great. Can you give us an idea on the number of trips they took and how much seed they're able to haul per trip?
Oh, golly. I really wished we could have sent you some video to add to this, but I didn't even think about it till we started talking about it. Oh man. They were making, 25-minute turns. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not even going to try to guess on how many pounds of seed per trip, but there might have been some 45-minute turnaround times on some of the farther sites to the east side of the fire, but it was a lot of seed per trip. So pretty impressive to see that operation out there. And so I'm going to have to not give you an actual number, but it's a lot of seed. So
No, it's great. I think if you do have any video footage, we would be happy to share that out. I think it'd be really great for everyone to see.
Sure.
If you can just reiterate where you purchased the seed for the 22,000 acres.
So yes, there's boy, there is a DOI seed bank. We're just going to call it that, and they work with vendors across the country that grow the seed, and they then contract with them to make that a seed available for our seed buy auction. And so then we go to, normally it's a in-person seed buy auction, but this year it was a virtual auction. And so that DOI organization then lists all the vendors and the seed that they have available, and all of the folks who need seed during that specific seed auction then take turns bidding on how much seed they want for that particular line item or vendor seed that's available. So it's kind of an internal thing to, well, it's not an internal, other organizations can participate in that, but it's organized by the Department of Interior.
Great. Sounds like quite the operation.
It was a 12-hour day.
Oh boy.
Yes.
And was that all done virtually then? Or did you, normally you go in person?
Yes. Normally it's an in-person event, but yes, this year we did it all via a Teams activity. And so, Marlon and Aaron and Anna, and there was about 5 of us. We were all kind of working together in the Teams environment, but then behind the scenes, we were on the phone and texting, and when something became available that we wanted and somebody else got it, we were having to quickly look at the other seeds that were coming up for bid to determine if those seeds were appropriate replacements. And so, yes, it was quite the effort to try to make sure that we got seed that was suitable for our conditions in the area.
And if I remember right, Aaron said you guys, you got a fairly good seed mix. I mean, not entirely what you were looking for, but it was doable.
Yes, again, it was all native perennial type grasses that are, either the same or similar to the native grasses that we have growing in the Grand Junction field office. So, some of it might have been like a Utah strain of a particular seed instead of a Colorado native specific strain, but they were all relatively close. And we're looking for that environmental component that they are successful in, and as long as it was stated that it had similar success rates in the high elevation desert, cold desert country, then we tried to replace what we could with appropriate seed.
Great. Is there research being done on long-term water quality after fires on riparian areas?
So, yes, a couple things are going on currently. We have, I'm actually working with some CMU students to do some water quality monitoring. They'll be going out and taking some snow melt water quality samples for us, and we'll analyze that and compare it to the data that we've collected long-term at those sites. And then I'm also working with USGS, who is working in cooperation with multiple organizations and agencies to do some water quality monitoring on Roan Creek and Big Salt Wash for us. And we're currently working on the contracting and scope of work for that, but they'll be putting in water quantity monitoring, flow monitoring devices on Roan Creek and Big Salt Wash, and included in those sites will be water quality parameters such as nutrients, salinity, and sediment. And so that information will be getting collected, hopefully starting in the next month or two. And, just to really provide us with that information on what the change really was in water quality for us.
Great. That kind of blends itself into a question I had of just other universities getting involved with the monitoring efforts that you mentioned in your video. CMU, is there others that are coming on board?
We mentioned that there was a lot of interest that kind of perked up, kind of mid to late part of the fire, but we haven't had any formal research agreements with anybody outside of CMU and our own agency. So not any real big players, mainly I think because of the other three larger fires in the Colorado River Basin that are closer to the university setting. They have plenty of opportunity closer to home with probably a few more values at risk that are of importance compared to our values at risk. So I would expect that's probably why we're not seeing that far-reaching interest from the universities on the other side of the mountain.
Okay. Did your Bear ESR teams work with NRCS or others for a burn assessment or seeding stabilization on private land? If so, do you know where funding came from to work on private lands?
So yes, we had an NRCS representative in the Bear process. He participated in all our meetings, and as a part of that effort, we provided him with all the information that we had, and he was going to take that back to his organization to try and help establish, kind of that rehabilitation plan for private lands. We did get some funding through seed donation from Colorado Parks and Wildlife to do some additional areas, but I think that was that seed was spread on public lands, and so I'm not sure where they are in the process with helping private landowners at this time, but I know NRCS has at least got a representative working on that.
Great, that's a good question. Can you give us an idea, the constraints this fire had on the GJ office, and really touching on future considerations, maybe changes in operations? What, I know you're still figuring all that out, but if you could go into that in a little more detail. I know it was the biggest fire your field office had ever seen, so.
Boy, yeah, we had a post-fire after-action review, or AAR, about our suppression, resource advisor interactions, and I think the bulk of that conversation really stemmed around how to deal with a fire so large and so many different resource advisors coming and going and working on this fire. And then, it really had to do with, how we deal with that in the future. I think we didn't really come up with any great solutions, because I think we were pretty effective in our response to this fire. But again, just maybe formalizing the resource advisor leader process, where we have one formal resource advisor that's obtaining reports from the field going resource advisors and making sure that information is conveyed up the chains of command so that they can then get dispersed across the different divisions more effectively and consistently. I think, that's probably what we are finding, were, different resource advisors applying some effective methodologies one day, and then, somebody replacing that resource advisor and, maybe changing that just a little bit, and not bad ways. They're both effective ways to do things, but just a little bit differently. And so just making sure that, when one thing is decided, that it's shared with the person coming in the next day, so that it's not, changing tactics every day. I think that's primarily, what we learned from that effort. I think the fire suppression organization did a really good job in trying to deal with this fast moving fire in rough terrain. And I just hope we don't have another big one like this. That's the biggest learning event, right? Let's hope that we can get out and not see this again.
Right. Well, and it burned for a long time, and so you had a lot of personnel out there. Challenging of how long do you keep them out there before you bring in a new group of people.
Yes.
So last question I have for you is how your funding panned out with all the other wildfires that were happening across the country this past season, and if you guys came out okay from all that, and you're competing with funding with a lot of different states.
So again, we were, able to purchase, we obtained all the funding we requested for the ES, the 1 year kind of activities that we are requesting. But that again wasn't competitive funding, and we're still waiting to hear about the long-term, the BAR, that additional 3 years worth of funding. We still haven't heard back from that.
Okay.
So I think there are still negotiations going on.
Got it. Okay. Well, I'm going to let the other two presenters come back on. And if anyone has any, now that you've seen all of the videos, I do have one question that I want to ask, and then we'll keep it open for other additional questions that come in. This pertains to, what the future holds, which you just kind of alluded to, Kevin. Let's hope we don't have another big fire like that, or don't have another fire at Connected Lakes. In relation to the increased drought and wildfire mitigation, do you have any additional proactive approaches, both for the sites that we toured today and others that you manage? And anyone can chime in. Feel free if you have a comment to that.
We're starting to utilize species in terms of reclamation that are a little more adapted to an arid environment. So New Mexico, privet, Apache bush, I think, out of Arizona, and then some of the different cottonwood species. So that's one of the things we're trying to do. And then also just ensuring that we've got gaps, I guess, where if we need to do fire suppression, we can do that a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think, the BLM has a pretty active fuels reduction program, and we are continuing to work on those projects in other locations across the field office to help remove that overgrowth of historic vegetation that is causing these potential fires. And I think we'll continue operations as normal as far as the fuels reduction goes.
I guess we're starting to look at where we get our seed from. If we need to buy it from southern sources, other areas, to adjust to climate change in the future. Where we get our seedlings, our plantings from, we're starting to look into that. At this time, we've bought some seed from mostly, I guess, Dolores Southwest Seed, but not any further, I guess, south than that.
Great. Kevin, this is probably, I'll start the question off with you, but if you could talk about the collaboration with the local airport and in relation to community collaboration and working as a team, if and when fires happen in the future within the Grand Valley, and how that looks, and if there are any lessons learned from there, what we should be thinking about for the future.
Right. So I think, this has taught us that we probably need to take a look at those cooperative agreements we have with those or locations, before fire season. And so I think we'll go through a process identifying the landing strips or those remote airports that we need or facilities that we may need, and start working on cooperative agreements, before fire season occurs. And, I think that the use of the airport for the seeding operation, identified a shortcoming there in the fact that, we probably need to, get those things negotiated and in place prior to this happening. So then there isn't that little bit of a delay in whether it's, a suppression response or, a post-fire rehabilitation response.
Okay, thank you. Peter, Melissa, do you have any other comments on that? Okay, we do have one question that came in. Do you have recommendations for collaboration with water resource fields in the future? Do you find value in other natural resource fields preparing for future fire seasons?
I think we were fortunate to really have started our assessment, inventory, and monitoring effort, our AIM efforts, whether it was aquatic or terrestrial, about 5 years ago, and obtaining that pre-fire information across the landscape. And so I think we're well on our way to having that information. As far as other folks, private landowners or other organizations, thinking about looking at, places that have the potential for these catastrophic fires and doing their pre-monitoring out there so they know what the conditions were before the fire is probably a good place to start. And again, we were pretty fortunate to have that pre-fire data that's going to help us determining success and rehabilitation.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. For us, I'm not certain I'm understanding the question exactly, but we do work with Ute Water, also Clifton Water, and then also as an agency, monitoring what the impact of a fire is going to be in terms of sediment load in the stream and what the aquatic impact is for that ecosystem, but then also folks pulling water for municipal use. So that does occur at our level also.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to answer this, but we do work with our water user groups in the valley for supplying water, especially on our projects, I guess, all over the West Slope, if other agencies need water for firefighting from our reservoirs. Specifically on our wildlife areas, we do have ponds and irrigation water available, but I guess we work mostly with the local fire districts and BLM for firefighting for.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Middle Watershed Council organization out of Glenwood and Silt kind of area, they've reached out to us. As the Grizzly Creek fire is right there in their back door, they reached out to us to, kind of ask what we're doing on our end of the Colorado River. And so I know there's an effort to, try to coordinate some of this between the larger fires.
I wanted to thank you all for not only spending time with RiversEdge West staff in the field. I know that took some time and effort and coordination on your part, so thank you all for that. You've all done an amazing job of dealing with the wildfire mitigation and restoration, given the challenges that we're facing these days. So thank you for taking the time today to answer participant questions. We really appreciate it, and hopefully to all the participants, you enjoyed the field trips. It was the best we could do since we couldn't be in person out in the field. So I think it was a good alternative. So thank you all. With that, we will end this session. So we're going to meet back here at 12:15 for our climate workshop. So you have about an hour break. If anyone does want to join a breakout room, we will open some up. So if you want to chat with anyone, you can talk with them directly in the chat box, and you can meet up if there's other conversations that this has sparked. And as a reminder, please fill out the conference eval before the end of the day. So thank you all again, and have a good lunch break.
Thank you.
Thank you.